Hello everyone, welcome to the Tim Booker channel. Wishing you all an enjoyable listening experience. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a book by the Austrian literary master, Stefan Zweig, titled Joseph Fouché. This is a 277-page thick biography with a subtitle, Portrait of a Political Man. The name Fouché might not ring a bell for you. However, his two superiors, Robespierre and Napoleon, they were world-famous figures. At the turn of the 18th and 19th centuries, Fouché was active in the French political scene alongside these two renowned figures. But he betrayed both of them, even turning to persecute them, earning himself the moniker, political chameleon. Balzac and Dumas portrayed Fouché in their novels, but Zweig was the first to give him a proper biography. Why did the esteemed writer Zweig decide to dedicate a book to such a negative figure as Fouché? Well, you see, Zweig's most renowned biographies, such as The Familiar, The World of Yesterday, focus on influential literary figures, explorers, and revolutionaries. Compared to these individuals, Fouché, the inconsistent politician, seems rather insignificant. Yet, Zweig insists, Fouché had his own formidable qualities. In the tumultuous French political landscape of the late 18th century, Fouché switched sides 7 times and managed to survive the brutal political struggles. This remarkable survival skill is a form of prowess. Moreover, Fouché established Europe's first secret police. Understanding the darker aspects of human nature, he became indispensable to Napoleon, even assuming leadership roles within the French government. Individuals like Fouché, devoid of any ism, yet profoundly composed, shrouded in darkness, are essential chapters in every political history. Zweig tells us that he chose to write about Fouché to remind us, the key players in real history might not necessarily be the heroes. Figures like Napoleon and Robespierre influenced the tide of their times, yet when they navigated the labyrinth of real politics, faced with intrigue and deceit, they had to rely on cunning strategists like Fouché. It was such a character, without political ideals or heroic charisma, who determined the fate of 2 kings and 2 emperors in less than 30 years. Historians and writers, however, often prefer to romanticize the bloodshed and turmoil, focusing on heroes rather than individuals like Fouché. Zweig refuses to tread the conventional path. He wants to write about both stellar heroes and anti-heroes like Fouché. He cautions us, history and human nature are exceedingly complex. The victors might not triumph due to goodness. Fouché, the chameleon, through his life, exposes the dark recesses of history, dispelling the misleading, heroic narrative. Thus, it's worthwhile to explore. In revisiting Fouché's political career, Zweig expertly utilizes his literary mastery to vividly depict this peculiar figure's mental state. He transports us back to late 18th century France, engaging us in every coup, every conspiracy, evoking a sense of thrilling immediacy. This book is not just a fascinating biography but also a masterpiece in literary history. So, despite its initial release in 1929, Joseph Fouché has remained a perennial bestseller for over 90 years, translated into over a dozen languages. It's bound to captivate you with its timeless appeal. The author, Stefan Zweig, was one of the most prominent German-language literary figures in the first half of the 20th century. His notable works like Letter from an Unknown Woman and The Royal Game continue to resonate. Apart from fiction, Zweig excelled in writing biographies. Drawing from rich historical sources and incorporating a psychoanalytic perspective, he portrayed the lives of historical figures like Nietzsche and Tolstoy with gripping intensity. Joseph Fouché marked Zweig's first foray into political figures, and he excelled remarkably. His meticulous portrayal is sure to offer you abundant insights. Next, I'll split the discussion into 2 parts to introduce the main content of the book. First, we'll explore how Fouché, an unassuming provincial youth, rose in the French political arena to become an unshakable master of survival. In the second part, we'll delve into why Fouché became Napoleon's trusted confidant, how their relationship deteriorated, and the hidden truths behind their rift. Before delving into the book's content, let me pose a question: what differs in the techniques required to persuade 1 or 2 individuals compared to convincing 1 or 200? It's a complex query on first hearing. We've all heard of convincing with reason, yet we're aware that appealing to emotions is equally effective in many instances. Which takes precedence? Well, that depends on the number of individuals you aim to persuade. Generally, when addressing 100 or even 1,000 people in a speech, mere reasoning isn't enough. As everyone's cognitive abilities and interests vary vastly, persuading such a multitude to act towards a common goal demands the orchestration of their emotions, employing sophisticated linguistic skills to influence them. Conversely, if it's a private discussion among 2 or 3 people deliberating significant matters, emotions alone aren't sufficient. You must lay out the pros and cons, make the other party genuinely agree with your rationale, only then can unified action be taken. Why raise this question? Because in late 18th century France, there were abundant orators skilled in appealing to emotions. The famous figures like Robespierre and Danton could face hundreds or thousands, speaking for hours without exhaustion. During the peak of the French Revolution, public speeches became a societal norm for mobilization. In this domain, our protagonist, Fouché, wasn't a master. However, in a setting of just a few individuals, clandestinely discussing significant decisions, Fouché's abilities were invaluable. His composed mind and astute analytical skills were exceptional at the time. Fouché's mastery stemmed from his upbringing. Born in 1759 in Nantes, a port city in western France, to a father who was a ship captain, Fouché's frail health prevented him from inheriting the family trade, compelling him to pursue education in a church school. Proficient in mathematics and physics, he caught the eye of his mentors, securing a teaching position right after graduation. Serendipitously, Nantes Church was responsible for supplying teaching staff for Catholic schools across France. Leveraging his outstanding teaching abilities, Fouché swiftly gained prominence, serving as an itinerant lecturer and headmaster in 7 to 8 cities nationwide. A decade passed in the blink of an eye. At this juncture, you might wonder, why did Fouché settle for being a teacher in church schools? Shouldn't he have become a priest, then a bishop, climbing the social ladder? After all, in 18th century France, Catholic clergy held a high societal status. The author, Zweig, analyzes this. He explains that during Fouché's itinerant teaching, he acquainted himself with many businessmen and intellectuals belonging to France's third estate, the bourgeoisie. Fouché realized that this estate, discontent with the despotic monarchy, had accumulated substantial grievances, ready to ignite a revolution. However, the clergy's proximity to the monarchy posed a risk of being casualties. For Fouché, choosing a bleak career for a trifling gain was out of the question. Zweig discerns Fouché's first philosophy of survival: he'd never unconditionally tie himself to any power. He aimed to stand by the victors, meticulously strategizing for this purpose. For instance, in 1789, while teaching in northern France, Fouché formed an inseparable bond with a brilliant lawyer, Robespierre. Fouché was once engaged to Robespierre's sister. He even bought a suit for Robespierre, sending him to Paris for the newly convened Estates General. This meeting ignited the flames of the French Revolution, and Fouché made the right bet from the start. Robespierre became a prominent figure in Paris, and Fouché didn't lag behind. In 1792, he was elected as a deputy in his hometown to the National Convention, becoming one of the 750 legislators shaping France's destiny. However, upon Fouché's arrival in Paris, he didn't align with Robespierre. In the National Convention, Robespierre led the radical Jacobins, the smallest but most radical faction, sitting atop the hall, earning the moniker, the Mountain. The largest faction was the moderate constitutional monarchists, dubbed the Marsh. Fouché neither wanted to be the Mountain nor the Marsh. He sought refuge in a safe environment, observing the situation without revealing his stance. Consequently, Fouché claimed allegiance to the moderate Girondins, using this party as a guise. Naturally, the extremist Robespierre could never forgive him, and thus, their relationship fractured. However, Fouché's neutrality was never constant. When he sensed the revolution heading toward a new phase, with the radical faction gaining momentum, he immediately switched to the Jacobins, singing an even louder tune than Robespierre. On January 16, 1793, the National Convention voted on whether to execute the deposed King Louis XVI. Fouché anticipated the votes, confidently predicting the radicals' victory. Hence, he decisively cast his supporting vote, presenting his ticket. As he foresaw, Louis XVI lost his head. Subsequently, the National Convention appointed Fouché as the prefect of the lower loyer, dispatching him to the south to suppress uprisings by royalists and rebellions against the Catholic Church. This former church lecturer, now donning the symbol of the revolution, the red bonnet, led an army into churches, shattering statues and crosses. When the second largest city in France, Lyon, openly displayed opposition against the Mountain, Fouché ordered the army to fire, executing over 2,000 civilians involved in the uprising. This former, neutral, figure had transformed into a personification of terror. However, Fouché's excessive acts didn't earn him rewards. By spring 1794, upon his return to Paris, the political winds had changed again. By that time, Robespierre had ruthlessly eliminated most dissenters. From the lenient Marche to the core members of the Mountain, like Danton, all who challenged Robespierre's authority met the guillotine. Ironically, at this stage, Robespierre wanted to put the brakes on the revolution. He realized the radical course was disrupting the country's normal functioning and aimed to eliminate a few extremists to reinstate his balanced image. Fouché, who had recently left a reputation as the executioner in Lyon, became Robespierre's new target. Thus ensued a life-and-death struggle between them. Zweig writes, the duel between Robespierre and Fouché was one of the most thrilling episodes in French Revolution history and one of the most stirring psychological dramas. Both were of similar age, intimately acquainted with each other's secrets, a match made in heaven. However, their power balance was quite disparate. Robespierre was the president of the National Convention, holding the reins of the administrative machinery. A speech from him resonated throughout Paris. In contrast, Fouché's potential allies were merely a few hundred legislators who had narrowly escaped the guillotine. Some belonged to the Marche, while others were with the Mountain. Their allegiances varied. Fouché's task was to unite these fragmented opposition groups, capitalizing on their fear and resentment toward Robespierre to topple this opponent. Remember Fouché's stint as a teacher in church schools? According to author Zweig, it was during this time that Fouché honed the art of secret persuasion. Typically, a class in French church schools comprised around 20 students. Fouché, spending ample time with them, easily discerned each person's unique preferences and character weaknesses. When conversing with students, he'd tailor his inducements according to their varied needs, persuading them to heed his words. Now, Fouché employed these techniques on the members of the National Convention. In the summer of 1794, he'd come and go, sneaking into the homes of hundreds of legislators, whispering in their ears. His opening statements often revolved around condemning Robespierre, enumerating how drastic policy changes had caused immense losses. Subsequently, Fouché delved into leveraging people's inner fears. He confidently claimed, "I've obtained Robespierre's newly drafted blacklist, and your name's on it. You're heading to the guillotine. Unless we get rid of Robespierre, we're finished." Under this combined assault of logic and emotion, who could resist? Mountain faction member Barras became Fouché's captive audience. Barras controlled the National Guard, the Parisian garrison force. It was this army that determined Robespierre's fate. Tailoring individualized strategies based on each person's needs and weaknesses constituted Fouché's second philosophy of survival. Robespierre failed to comprehend this. He remained fixated on his ability to deliver speeches in public, believing that launching verbal bombs would disintegrate his opponents. On July 27, 1794, Robespierre initiated an attack on Fouché in the Parliamentary Hall in this manner. Unexpectedly, Fouché was nowhere to be found. Over the past few weeks, he had united all the opposition, now poised to wait and watch. Hence, as Robespierre commenced his lengthy discourse, he was interrupted by the assembly members below, all eager to express their discontent. By evening, the military arrived, imprisoning Robespierre, and the next day, he was led to the guillotine. In 1795, France reorganized a new administrative structure, the Directory, marking the end of the climax of the revolution. According to general expectation, given Fouché's immense effort to overthrow Robespierre, he'd surely secure a position in the Directory, right? Surprisingly not. From 1795 to 1798, Fouché completely withdrew from politics, not even taking up a seat as a legislator. There were two reasons for this anomaly. Firstly, despite bringing down Robespierre, Fouché's notoriety as the executioner of Lyon hadn't dissipated. Most officials in the Directory were from the original Girondist faction, reluctant to associate with such a scandalous figure. Furthermore, Fouché's first philosophy of survival also played a role. After Robespierre's death, the French political landscape plunged into chaos once again. Internal strife plagued the Directory, while external threats from the anti-French coalition loomed large. In such times, Fouché naturally opted for caution. However, stepping away from politics didn't mean distancing himself from political affairs. In the final 5 years of the 18th century, France was embroiled in warfare everywhere. Royalists launched rebellions, factions within the Directory engaged in mutual conflict, and Louis XVI's brother, Louis XVIII, stirred under the support of England and Russia. War necessitated military supplies, and the control of French supplies lay entirely in one person's hands, Fouché's former ally, now a prominent Directory figure, Barras. Barras aimed to monetize his power but couldn't openly intervene, requiring a shrewd and vigilant individual as an intermediary. Fouché was the obvious choice. Thus, in 1797, Fouché and Barras formed an alliance. They sold military supplies to royalists, government forces, and remnants of the Mountain faction, reaping abundant profits. Fouché also resumed his former trade, orchestrating secret transactions between major political groups. His timing for returning to the political stage grew increasingly calculated. In July 1799, explosive news spread across Paris. Fouché, who had been in hiding for over 4 years, became the Minister of Police in the Directory, heading the national police force. It was his old friend Barras who summoned him back. In Barras's view, the disarrayed Directory couldn't handle the deep-seated internal and external crises, necessitating change. Moreover, with 5 top-tier officials in the Directory, Barras was only one among them and was somewhat dissatisfied. He planned to support 2 newcomers, one to monitor his adversaries, eliminate internal threats, and the other to lead troops in battle against external foes. The former naturally became Fouché, while the latter was a 30-year-old young general named Napoleon Bonaparte. However, what Barras didn't know was that Fouché wasn't grateful for being his benefactor. He had already seen Napoleon's abilities and political ambitions, deciding to assist Napoleon in overthrowing the Directory and becoming the dictator. Thus began the 16-year-long collaboration between Napoleon and Fouché. Part 2. That was the portrayal of Joseph Fouché in the book, his journey to becoming a master of survival through opportunism during the French Revolution. However, surviving doesn't equate to thriving. After 1799, Fouché's ascension was reliant on a tool he had meticulously crafted himself, his intelligence network. Previously, Fouché had made a fortune by partnering with Barras in speculative business ventures during his hiatus from politics. However, such newly rich individuals were rare in late 18th century France. Following the collapse of absolute monarchy, many nobles lost their fortunes overnight. They retained extensive social connections but lacked money and sought patrons. Fouché capitalized on this, spending lavishly to develop these old nobles into his private spies. They gathered intelligence, where radical groups convened, who plotted against the Directory, what messages Louis XVIII's couriers carried. All these details were relayed to Fouché. Upon becoming Minister of Police, he legitimized this spy network, forming Europe's first modern secret police force. In Paris, at every cultural salon, hotel, even high-class brothels, Fouché's spies and informants were active. Fouché particularly enjoyed cultivating influential noblewomen as his informants, those who were ostentatious and stood out in social circles. Through these informants, he not only learned about corrupt officials and new romances of celebrities but also assessed the strengths and weaknesses of different factions. Interestingly, Fouché created this intelligence web not for Barras or the Directory but for himself. He surveilled not just the military and society but also his superiors. Each day, he spent 10 hours in his office, personally reviewing intelligence reports, meeting important informants. Decisions to arrest or execute political prisoners were solely his. If he obtained incriminating evidence against colleagues or superiors, he secured it in a safe, keeping it to himself. Zweig notes that Fouché not only constructed this intricate intelligence apparatus but also successfully ensured that the entire network answered to him alone. While initially considered a tool by Barras, Fouché turned the tables. Among the female informants developed by Fouché was one named Josephine. She was the widow of a noble general and a prominent socialite in Paris. In 1796, Josephine remarried, and her new husband was the rising military star, Napoleon Bonaparte. As soon as Fouché became Minister of Police, he extracted from Josephine detailed information about Napoleon's background, personality, and preferences. Fouché keenly observed Napoleon's immense political potential and ambitions, realizing that he wouldn't settle for just being a general. Hence, in 1799, when Napoleon returned from the front lines, Fouché immediately went to visit him, waiting for an hour on a bench outside. According to Napoleon's recollections, during their first meeting, Fouché elucidated the factional dynamics within the Directory. He implied that if Napoleon sought to instigate a coup and seize ultimate power, he could assist by intercepting core intelligence to prevent other Directory officials from realizing Napoleon's power grab. Consequently, rendering the Directory deaf and blind, powerless to react. On November 9, 1799, Napoleon smoothly seized power, establishing the consulate with himself at the helm. His first decision as the new ruler was to retain Fouché as Minister of Police, followed by expelling his political benefactor, Barras. Why did Fouché and Barras have such different fates? According to Zweig, this pertained to Fouché's third survival philosophy. He believed that controlling and influencing others' actual power was what he sought, eschewing the pomp and vanity associated with power. Barras, on the other hand, sought Napoleon's gratitude, aiming for prestigious positions and titles, which irked Napoleon. Hence, the stark contrast in their fates. Starting from 1799, Napoleon and Fouché forged a strong master-servant relationship. Zweig writes, one was shaping the world, the other was a pragmatic politician, together they staged a grand drama. Although Napoleon didn't entirely trust Fouché and occasionally distanced himself, he couldn't escape Fouché's vast intelligence network or his political scheming ability. Seeing Napoleon's ascendancy, Fouché wholeheartedly supported him. After Napoleon proclaimed himself emperor in 1804, Fouché was appointed as Minister of Police, later bestowed with the title of Duke. Whenever Napoleon waged wars abroad, Fouché was tasked with maintaining stability in the homeland. However, Fouché once took matters into his own hands. In 1809, he sensed that the prolonged wars were draining France's resources. Secretly, he sent an emissary to Britain, attempting to broker peace talks between England and France. A year later, Napoleon discovered this plot and was furious. He dismissed Fouché from all positions, sending him into retirement in Italy. Even in his final moments in office, Fouché was busy organizing and hiding away those sensitive, covert secrets in his safe. Living in seclusion in Italy, Fouché lost his prized intelligence network and was devoid of opportunities to plot new political conspiracies. This retreat lasted 4 years. However, fate hadn't completely abandoned him. In April 1814, Napoleon was defeated by the anti-French coalition, compelled to abdicate. Fouché immediately rushed back to Paris, attempting to align with the new victors. Unfortunately, he arrived 4 days late, failing to immediately pledge allegiance to the new king, Louis XVIII. The restored regime under Louis XVIII wasn't too keen on the cunning political player Fouché and even contemplated arresting him. It was during this tumultuous period that Napoleon miraculously escaped exile, returning to France on March 20, 1815. Meanwhile, the failed opportunist Fouché, for not having capitalized on Louis XVIII's favor, unexpectedly became a loyal servant of Napoleon, once again assuming the role of France's Minister of Police. The regime established by Napoleon in 1815 is referred to by historians as the 100 Days. Though under the same ruler as the previous French Empire, its strength was incomparable. Former marshals and ministers of Napoleon either grew weary of war or sided with Louis XVIII. Only a handful remained loyal to Napoleon, among them Fouché. Although Napoleon doubted Fouché's loyalty, when he departed for the battlefield at Waterloo, he had to entrust the domestic front to Fouché. At this time, Fouché had returned to his first survival philosophy, never tying his fate to a beleaguered emperor. As soon as Napoleon's army set out, Fouché began contacting the British and Austrian governments, preparing to surrender. The tricks he used over a decade ago to manipulate Paris were now employed against Napoleon. Though the 100 Days still had some breath left, Fouché had already dug his grave. In the early hours of June 21, 1815, after losing the final battle, Napoleon hurriedly returned to Paris but did not find Fouché. Similar to his move against Robespierre in 1794, Fouché had convinced other ministers weeks before to act together, forcing Napoleon to abdicate once more. Even Napoleon's brother, Lucien, stood against him. On June 22, under Fouché's pressure, Napoleon reluctantly issued his abdication decree. Ostensibly, he passed the throne to his 4-year-old son, Napoleon II. However, the child remained under house arrest in Austria and never officially ascended. Handling the aftermath in Paris was a new 5-member interim government, led by none other than Fouché. At 56, for the first time in his life, Fouché stepped out of the role of a servant and became the master of France. Sadly, though adept at survival, Fouché never contemplated becoming the master of power. His expertise lay in plotting and betrayal, not in leading the French government. In a caustic remark, Zweig notes that when Fouché had no master to betray, he ended up betraying himself, formally pledging loyalty to Louis XVIII. Thus, in a castle in northern France, one of the most absurd political comedies of the 19th century unfolded. Fouché, the former Mountain member, kneeled, kissed Louis XVIII's hand, and requested the transfer of power to himself. Facing someone who had voted to execute his brother, Louis XVIII suppressed his disgust, appointing Fouché as the first minister of police for the Restoration monarchy. After a lifetime of servitude, Fouché, in a position of authority in the French government, lasted a mere 15 days. Ironically, though Louis XVIII's talent couldn't match Napoleon's, his vigilance far exceeded Napoleon's. After using Fouché to eliminate potential opposition, he directly ousted this chameleon, dispatching him to be an envoy to the Kingdom of Saxony. In January 1816, Fouché opened a newspaper to read news that shattered him. All those who had voted in favor of executing Louis XVI in 1793 were stripped of public office and banned for life from returning to France. As the voting had been done by name due to Robespierre's insistence, no one could deny their involvement. It could be said that after more than 20 years since Robespierre's death, he finally exacted his revenge on Fouché. In 1820, Fouché died in exile in Italy. It is said that the secret files he left behind took 5 hours to burn completely. Well, that covers the essence of Zweig's Joseph Fouché. In the political arena of late 18th and early 19th century France, Fouché wasn't the most outstanding figure in terms of ability, nor was he celebrated by historians. Yet, through his unique survival philosophy and meticulously crafted intelligence network, he not only survived but also influenced the course of French history several times, earning him the title of an extraordinary figure of his era. Zweig's biography of Fouché isn't an attempt to redeem him, but through Fouché's story, it sheds light on the duality of politics and the intricate nature of human character, holding lasting significance. Fouché's era has passed, but in the annals of history, there's more than one Fouché. That concludes the main content of this book. Congratulations on completing another book. Thank you all for your support and attention. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share this valuable knowledge with friends around you. Let's combine wisdom and practice to achieve our financial goals and create a better future together. Thank you, and goodbye.